Hey, this is Cap, and you're watching Thorin, the only man besides Richard Lewis who somehow found a way to get both League of Legends and Dota Redditors to hate him.
This is going to be episode 36 of Narrative Wake. This time with people who enjoy talking. I've learned that's actually... It took me a long time. It took me 35 episodes of Narrative Wake. I think it was 79 of Summoning Insight. And I've only learned now you actually need people who enjoy talking. And I've even learned there's another bonus level. This is when you've really completed the game. If you can also get people where there's an overlap into people actually enjoy listening to them talk as well. I've now learned that's the secret sauce. I didn't know that myself at the beginning. Partly because I didn't realise, you know what, I actually took everything I used to have for granted. Like, I used to think, you know what, that bloody Money Crystal, he thinks he's the hot shit, doesn't he? But you know what, he'd be nothing without me. Meanwhile, I could just make anything work, couldn't I? The hubris, Ellis.
One would argue you still haven't learned your lesson, Thorin, so there you go.
No, indeed. I haven't in many ways. I mean, I'll tell you what, here's the thing. I say this with affection and with love, but actually, one of the most ridiculous elements of hubris I've ever had in my career in esports is, like, when I do that show with Emily, the one I do for about LCK, I keep thinking every week that I'm going to nail the right frequency to make it really funny and have lots of, like, hilarious banter. And that's just never happened so far. Like, even if you say something that's, like, sort of funny, Emily just laughs twice and then just goes back to analysing the game. It's like, well, that's dead, isn't it? There, you know, or takes a joke that you're saying where it's obviously like, this is a good thing that actually people like Monty had like really nailed down, is they sort of knew how to put a pin in a topic, let like a joke happen, and then come back to the topic and continue on. But the difference is they would let the joke happen. The other thing that I've noticed Emily sometimes does is you'll make a joke and then she'll just think it's like a real comment and then just weave that into the analysis. And you're like, well, no, I didn't. Well, obviously you don't really mean like that guy's a fucking abused wife or something. No, it was a metaphor, Emily. I was trying to just make a comment about Coma and the fact that he just has to fuck up the greatest player of all time's life. Anyway, LS.
Yes.
I've been on the show many times before, and I like the fact that people still don't really know what it means to control a champion and to micro him in a way that only you know. I don't know if we'll ever know that. That might be like the secret of alchemy or something that will, to the end of time, never be known. But we're going to keep laying that out there. So I thought you were the ideal person to have on, to have a discussion about the current meta. And I already know when people hear that, they're going to be like, boo, like, you know, isn't this what every podcast has been for the last 2 weeks? But actually, I've watched some of them. I think it's been pretty fucking terrible, a lot of the breakdowns and the analysis so far, especially because so many people keep coming at it from the lens of all the people on Twitter have just decided from day one, it's terrible, it's shit, it's different, and it can't possibly be good. And then all the people on podcasts, especially because most of them literally are incentivized by their job to want League of Legends to succeed, have to ram everything through the other lens, which is, no, this is all overwhelmingly good. And you get all the old tired cliches that you get in every change in a game, which is like, the best players will adapt. It's like, well, yeah, that's like saying if we all have no legs overnight, then the best player in basketball will adapt. Like, I don't really know that he will, actually. That's not a given, you know. He might be really good still. He might be terrible. It might turn out having legs was essential to LeBron being able to be pretty good at basketball. I don't know. So let's start out here, okay? Just in terms of general sentiment, how do you enjoy the new meta, LS?
I think the new meta is fine, and I
is
think
your mic actually turned on, by the way?
I think it's fine in the sense that it's gravitating back towards its normal self. And I think that all the hype was ridiculous, and I think that people weren't properly assessing the game state. And I think that a lot of people that were commenting on it didn't have enough experience watching it. But then again, most people commenting on it can't even actually feel it because they can't play at that level in solo queue where it starts to matter, where you're meeting pros or something like that. Consistently, and you're getting to see how the champions interact, how the early game, mid game, late game transitions all feel. And I think that a lot of people are going off scrims. And when you're going off scrims with people that are incompetent on those champions, playing the champions, you're going to have a pretty biased viewpoint on it. And I think that your perspective of it can be really ridiculous. And so I think that's what happened, because as soon as it all came out and everyone was hyping it, I was pretty adamant on Twitter, and I would talk about it on stream that traditional ADCs are still better. And everyone is just of the narrative that bruiser bot lane, or champions can go anywhere and people have to play all these different champs. And I don't think that's the case. I do think that there's room for more creativity now than there was before, but extremely situationally.
Okay. Right, Kelsey, well, I'll put a pin in his point about the ADC. We'll come back to that. But just what were your general sentiments when you first saw it and since then?
I mean, the fundamentals of the game itself haven't changed. Like, there's a reason why people set up their compositions and play it like this. Like, you're always going to get a more well-rounded composition by having like an AD carry of some kind. And generally in the bot lane, because how you structure the map, everything, this has been gone over a million times. Like, this is the best place to put each of these champions. And then if we have an ADC, like, this is going to be the ideal place to put it, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's kind of how I felt about that. And it's just weird to me because it was almost like this overnight thing where someone says, oh my gosh, did you see what Deft is playing on Korean solo queue? And it just got to this ridiculous fervor where people said, okay, I have to try this. And everyone was trying it. And I started to think that, oh my God, like, these Korean players, they fucking know they can make the world go insane. It's just like people will just try whatever the fuck because Deft is playing it, So it's really weird. I think it got completely out of control. I still think that there's like a lot of, like Ella said, good situations where you can play a bunch of different things. Like, obviously ADC isn't the only thing that people are trying. Like, there's duo mid, there's all this other stuff. And then there are situational places for like almost all this stuff. And we can talk a little bit more about why, because I assume you'll ask, but it got really exaggerated.
Okay,
really
let's start with the first point that was brought up then. So LS, why are ADCs, first of all, still part of the game? Why are they essential? What's the factor there? Because obviously this was the big scare initially, was like not just people seemed less worried about mid laners playing support champions than they were about just ADC not existing.
I think when any major meta shift comes, we've seen this in Season 5, Season 6, Season 7, now we're seeing it again. Games tend to be a lot more chaotic, and people start complaining that games are ending at 15 minutes, or games are decided by 10 minutes, games are decided by 20 minutes. And with all the changes that happened over the years, bruisers come online quicker than traditional ADCs. And their impact can be felt it can be felt a lot stronger at the mid-game spike or around the first dragon or first major neutral objectives or a turret or something.
Sure.
And so I think when this is happening and people are trying to figure out how to pilot these new champions, how do these team compositions interact, having certain champion or, 3 or 4 champions that normally aren't in a team composition together with one another. Once they're all coming together, you have that chaos element that we often see usually during preseason. And when you combine that with the accelerant that the bruisers have over the ADCs, I think it gives into this hype narrative that bruisers are somehow better than ADCs. But just like in Season 6 and just like Season 5, Season 7, once everything tends to stabilize, once you start, stop obsessing over, Thunderlords or Fervor, or once you learn how to get out of the laning phase, learn how to transition, and the game goes back to an understood state, like, for instance, when the jungle change happened with Scuttlecrab, people didn't know all the new ward timers. So obviously things were a lot more chaotic. Now time has been allowed to pass, ward timers are more commonly understood, and it's easy to play around it. And thus mid lane goes back to a natural state, top lane and jungle are going back to slower, more controlled states. And that's historically something that happens across esports games. So as I said earlier, if you let it continue to gravitate towards this, eventually ADC players who are good at 8 marksmen or whatever, in team compositions overall, will gravitate back towards them, because bruisers and most champions, I have a term for it called slowing down. Bruisers tend to slow down. They effectively become the same champion at 3 or 4 items that they are at 5 and 6. Some ADCs aren't like that. And obviously there's going to be some mages and some top laners that aren't like that. Like Malzahar in the past never slowed down. He kept getting stronger with each item added. Caitlyn in the past would keep getting stronger with every item added. Twitch, Kog'Maw, these champions, the hyper carries.
Sure.
but very few champions in the game don't slow down. And so when you have these champions that they hit 3 and 4 items and then they begin fighting the same exact way, well, there's going to come a point where the ADCs or the champions that don't slow down, or they enable the team composition to not slow down naturally because of their scaling, becomes more useful because they're more powerful in stalemate situations when people are lacking ultimates, or when they're lacking flash, they're lacking teleport. They're more stable in those controlled environments and protecting and securing certain parts of the map while you're turtling, waiting for a Baron fight or a neutral objective fight around the 35 minute mark. And I hope that that's something that we see in coming weeks, because I think that there's like a lot of hyper carry ADCs that are grossly underutilized right now. And I think that it just has to do with marksmen and teams learning how to fare against the bruiser spikes.
Okay. So, Kelsey, in what Ellis was saying there, right, obviously this was the bizarre part, was the particular champions that were being played in the bot lane. I mean, obviously there's no point calling it ADC because they were ADC champions. But when this happened, like as Ellis says there's a rationale as to why it makes sense. This basically, the premise existed in past seasons anyway, because obviously what made the bruisers so useful in the top lane is when you have like 1 to 2 items, you can already do stuff at that point in time, whereas famously AD carries, you need about 3 before it's going to be super useful. But wasn't it always going to be a factor in this meta that unless people just snowballed the game, eventually it's going to be a bad thing, surely, that you don't have like a champion that's scaling and it's getting more and more powerful as the game goes on?
And there were some of the arguments are just that the games are going faster, and then part of this, of course, is that like people are going on these champions, but there are also other factors that led to this, like you can put more gold on meaningful carries, you're putting gold on the scuttle crab, you're changing the way wards work, you're changing durability on certain towers in the game. So all of these factors, and you're changing the way Baron works. Like Baron is now insanely easy to kill. So all of these factors kind of led the game to go faster, to like when Baron is as important as it is in the game, and it's like they buffed the damage for a while, but then they nerfed it back down again, and then they changed the health, so it's really easy to kill. So when Baron is that important and that easy to take, then having the 2-item spike when it first spawns becomes like that much more important. So if you're playing AD carry champions that take 3 items to get there, then the argument is, okay, the game is already over at that point, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. So that's generally how the thought process went. However, some of the strongest AD carries are still insanely strong on like 1-2 items, like Ezreal, Kai'Sa, to an extent Kai'Sa, but just like rage play champions, things like this are still really strong on 2 items. But it just becomes a situational place, like where do you play these champions? Like when are these things happening? And AD carries are just easier to abuse in the bottom lane as well now because of the regen nerfs. So that's why this kind of developed to an extent.
Okay. So one aspect, so explain this. What is the significance of the fact you can funnel gold, like almost Dota style, into the one person? And we have seen, particularly with some of the comps, actually it's reminiscent of how Dota 2's meta developed, where you had like 3 people, you had a tri-lane basically, where you had, I mean, it wasn't technically 2 supports, it was sort of like a support and a jungle, and they were like working with one guy to make sure he was safe, but he also got like mega fed with all the gold. So the reason why I want to ask like what the mechanism behind that is that's what made it so bizarre when I first heard both those factors and I watched these games with no ADCs, because I was thinking, wait a minute, if you can funnel gold into one person and you have a star AD carry on your team, isn't this the guy you should be funneling all the fucking gold into? And then he's going to get the items even faster. What am I missing there?
I think you can do that on Kai'Sa. You do jungle Kai'Sa with the mid support, and you can funnel all the gold into them. But obviously, some teams aren't going to be willing to put their AD carry into the jungle role, and then have the jungler be on the supportive role in mid lane, and then maybe make your mid laner go bottom lane because he's the one that's competent enough to still play a bruiser mechanically. And then you get all these wonky situations. I think that the funneling of the golden stuff is also a byproduct of nerfs that came to the jungle, like rubber banding XP nerf. Makes it harder to catch up to the jungler who can accelerate so far ahead. the passive gold, and then the Targons and the coin and all these other things that just make supports more useful. And then support kits and support itemization, where everything just has a little bit of fucking everything going on inside of it. Everything has CDR, everything has HP, everything has everything that you want. And when you put it on these utility mages that have great base abilities, or they're just really powerful in their own right, it reminds me of like Sona way back in the day with just a Sightstone, and she was really strong just because her abilities were so powerful. She didn't need any items, she didn't need any ramp to her damage. You can end up producing these team compositions where you can look at it like, okay, sure, if you add a mid laner with 150 more CS, maybe he has one extra item, like for instance a Lulu or something, but you can just have that person be down an item or an item and a half, and because the kit is so inherently useful and your jungler is so far ahead, it makes up for the difference. And so the only point that it ends up becoming problematic is if you mess up your tempo. It's entirely tempo based. Reminds me of like a timing attack in StarCraft, where if you botch it, then you're really far behind, but if it hits, then it cripples them.
Okay.
And a lot of it is also down to just jungle pressure and balancing like the fact that you don't have control of the map at all as well. Just to make it like even more simplified, it's like, okay, it's a lot easier to track the duo lane when they're in the mid lane most of the time, and then most of the time when they're not in the mid lane, they're doing camps to try to get this strategy to work. So you have a much better idea of where they are, which means that the enemy team has an opportunity to make their side lanes win just like really, really hard. And they have a jungler, so to an extent, if the jungler is a really strong champion like Camille or at level 2 or something like this, then you're in a position where that also has an isolation mechanism. You're in a position where they can actually just straight up attack the duo as well in their jungle and really set them behind. So I think the gold mechanism is in place for sure, but there's definitely ways to deal with it. And I think it's actually the onus is it's way easier effectively to screw it up than to have it succeed, I think, ultimately.
Okay, because obviously this is another factor that has been very bizarre, is that now you have, on the one hand, if you're junglers who like to play the carry junglers anyway. So I think actually one of the best examples of somebody who this has benefited is actually Haru on Gen G, where, because he only ever just one-dimensionally played like the fucking Camille or whatever, and then they subbed him out because he couldn't support the rest of the team as like an actual team jungler. Instead, in the team comps that they have now in Korea, he can actually be like one of the carries of the team and just take over the game. But at the same time, in the exact same meta, you actually have times where there's no jungler, basically, and you have someone running with the smite and then like a support helping him get farmed or something. So how can both things exist at the same time?
What do you mean? Like, there's a really strong carry jungler on one team who's like running around and jungling the other.
You can have that, and at the same time, the other team can have no jungler.
If the other team has no jungler, I think generally speaking, that team is at an inherent disadvantage. Just at least in the early stages of the game, if you get to like big team fights, 20-30 minutes, and you've executed your setup correctly, and the enemy team has like basically screwed up, then that's when you're supposed to be at an advantage. So I guess that's how they coexist in theory.
Do you think that will be something that is kind of like phased out? Like we'll just have junglers the whole time, basically, after the first initial experimentation period?
I mean, it's hard to say definitively now because there's a place for it, but I think that people will trend more towards having junglers.
I think it'll gravitate back towards standard meta in coming weeks. I mean, I really hope. I was disappointed when Riot nerfed the Yi Taric. I want it to be allowed to live so that people can find answers to it, because I've seen firsthand what Blizzard did to some builds and strategies and stuff in StarCraft games. I don't think it's unbeatable. I don't think it's broken, and I think it's actually healthy that people learn how to beat it. Because I think it's like a build order. It's reminding me of like the Flash build or like the Bisu build or something. I tweeted out. I think if everything's allowed to just continue as is, I think maybe it situationally appears as a cheese. but I think the meta just gravitates back to where it was at a few months ago. I think everything gravitates back towards tank meta and then scaling and defense with ADCs and all that good jazz. Just as the game gets more understood, the ward timings, play around certain gimmicks and stuff. And the only thing that ever shakes it up that I think Riot does a really good job at is just this completely asinine patch or something where everyone doesn't know what the fuck's going on. And then we live in this world of chaos for like 1 to 2 months where people are trying to figure out all the new timings and all the new strategies and whatnot and how champions interact. And then it stabilizes again and then waits for the next big shakeup.
Is it just a fad, Kelsey?
I mean, I think he seemed like he was hesitant to call it a cheese, but I would call it a cheese. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad or it's just shit or garbage or it will never work, but it's like something that is counterable, and that if people continue to do this type of thing, then teams will figure out how to play against it. It will work situationally, but I mean, even a lot of times to make these strategies work, you have to literally physically go into the enemy jungle and cheese level 1 to make sure you're shutting down the enemy jungler so that you get like the 2v2 prio that you want. So I think that it makes sense to call it a cheese, and in that sense, it is kind of a fad, yeah.
Okay, so one aspect that obviously even in the last it wasn't even the last season, it was like the last split of League of Legends that was significant was like itemization changes, and that's obviously been a big factor that's altered the meta now. For the pure layman, explain this to me, Kelsey. In a traditional team of old, you definitely had times where you ran, for example, dual AP, top and mid. But the flaw with doing teams that didn't have some balance between attack damage and AP is obviously the other team, if they notice that early enough, just build the resistance necessary to counter that. And you're in deep shit if they've got all MR across all the champions and you have all AP champions. Why is that not an issue at certain times in this meta? How have people been able to get away without having the attack damage?
I mean, I think it is. Part of the reason why Dr. Mundo is just like so blind pickable and so everywhere is because a lot of times people are just building like insane heavy AP compositions, and Dr. Mundo can rush Spear Visage, and then he's like happy and good to go in a lot of situations. So Dr. Mundo, for example, hates AD carries. Anything that can kind of later on he can't get onto and that can do % health damage with itemization or anything like that, Dr. Mundo hates them. So I think that champion priorities end up changing because you're running these compositions. It's like way easier to mess up draft, I think, also, if you're not like going for an ADC composition. It's also way easier to kind of have the enemy team plan against you if you don't have the option of running AD, or you've broadcasted that I'm actually benching my ADC main, and I'm going to run 2 supports for sure, like Snake are doing, or 2 like bruiser style champs for sure, like Fnatic are doing. So those types of situations, I actually think it's theoretically easier to draft against those teams if they're not going to pull out an ADC and they've just broadcasted that, basically.
Okay. So one thing I wanted to ask about, because I found it quite curious, was when I first saw all these weird comps that people were playing, I actually really did think people had gone to like they totally opened their mind, Morpheus style, to like the Dota concept, which is that in Dota, a lot of heroes can be played on all the different roles, and instead it's more like how good is your particular player at that role on that hero as to whether you draft it or not. And what you do is sometimes you take something that's OP, but you're like, essentially you flex it and you're like, right, I'll put it onto this guy because he's so good actually that even on a lesser role he can use it. So it's more like this is just going wherever the best player for that hero is. But what's been bizarre to me is that doesn't seem to have actually happened in League. Like, even though they bench certain players, like they haven't let certain mid laners play, and some of the AD carries haven't played, obviously. What's bizarre is they have games where if they were doing the Dota approach, so for example, I saw a game where SK Telecom played Master Yi, and I'm like, well, brilliant. I know Faker is amazing at Master. Oh, he's not playing it, he's supporting Master Yi, right? Well, this is cancer already. And then I saw all these AP champions going into the bot lane. Oh, no problem. You'll obviously just move your mid lane. Nope, they're not moving the mid lane. The AD carry player who's used to positioning on AD carries is going to play a mid lane mage. Like, Why has that transition not happened, do you think? Because I haven't seen any team actually do that, actually transition the player to the place they want to play the hero or champion. Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think we saw that. SKT lane swapped back and forth a few times with Faker, but I think it's probably mostly just in part to comfort with playing the lane, or maybe rotations that are pertaining specifically to the lane, and then how experienced are they. I would expect to see it more out of China and Korea than I would out of NA or EU, because in solo queue there, people are so hell-bent on getting only their role, and they have so many different IDs where if they don't get their role, they dodge and whatnot, that I think that one of the reasons where I was expecting to see more presence of like bruiser bot lanes and whatnot, or top lanes going around or doing the stuff that Echo Fox is doing, is because Western players are really fucking bad at off-rolling, because they've never learned how. And I don't think that they actually understand each other's roles. So
Unless,
even if they're...
Can I just trigger you for a second? Because I actually brought up your theory that you said here, but I didn't say it was explicitly your theory. I think off the top of my head, on the episode we did about top laners, and first of all, Haunter, so one-time protege of yours, and then obviously Alfari, who, listen, you did it yourself. You're the one who bigged him up. You said he was one of the best. They both, don't worry, LS, they both claim that not only do they understand the other roles, but they think most pro players understand the other roles.
I mean,
yeah. No, they don't.
I mean, I guess it depends how far you want to stretch the term understand and roles, so
Yeah.
I guess it's as elastic as that is, you can make it work.
No, they don't.
some players are comfortable just like going to other lanes with champions that they're good at, and they feel like that's more comfortable. Some players are like, well, I will get ganked if I go top lane because I'm not used to playing within top lane, and I at least understand the role enough to know that I'm not going to be as comfortable knowing like when the jungler's coming. I'm not as comfortable using TP or things like this, so I'd rather just learn a new champion playing bot or something like this. Like some players will think like that. Other players will think, send me mid, I'm playing Kai'Sa. Like, fuck that, in this funnel strat or something like this, because they would rather play a champion they're more comfortable with than learn a mage or something. So
I also think that I think that there are some players that do understand other roles, but I mean you can just watch any of those fucking YouTube videos where the people are like talking about the game with each other. I don't know the titles of them all, the behind the scenes stuff and whatnot.
Right.
And just hear the amount of fucking times they have to question each other on different things, or why can't you do that? Why can't you don't fucking know each other's roles. Like, just turn on your goddamn solo queue stream and watch you fucking play like a boost, or, Forgiven puts it well, Giga boosted ape or something. They're completely, they don't know what they're doing. They think that because they can pilot a champion inside of a fucking solo queue setting, that it means that they understand the role on par with their teammates, but they don't, because you can see the amount of discord that occurs inside of those behind the scene videos.
By the way, LS, I unironically fucking love the fact that you always say pilot the champion, like, just to fulfill your mech dream fantasy that this is like fucking anime or something. You're like, who's piloting that mech? I would know his abilities anywhere. That is Yugi. Like, fucking...
Oh, shit.
I just like how ridiculous your personality is, basically. Okay, right? So here's the question then. Let's tie it back into the actual discussion here. So as you referenced with Echo Fox, this is another thing. See, this is the sad thing. This is how whack League of Legends is. That when everyone's like, wow, the sky's falling, everything's possible. I'm like, cool, everything's possible. Let's get down a bit. What? You actually have done like 3 different things, and you're totally limited even in that. Because one of the first things I thought when I heard about how the meta was set up was brilliant. Well, you know what? Now all those guys who want to be top lane carriers, it's your time, mate. Just, you can take that hero, go anywhere you want in whichever lane, get gold funneled into you. You can even at times have 2 fucking people supporting you. Now's the time, right? Hooney, Khan, let's load them all up. Let's see how good these guys are. No, almost no one except Hooney's even done that. Is it just not as viable? Does it just not work, Kelsey? What's the problem?
I mean, yeah, I think there are a couple of things. Like, Tooney is having fun. He's playing like Talia and all this other shit. He's just having a good time. But a lot of players will think, okay, not only am I learning like a champion that I haven't practiced a lot, but I'm also learning the dynamics and of another role and like when I'm supposed to roam on certain timings and all the stuff that I'm not used to, like how do I use TP in this situation, all these other things. So that's like two different things that they're having to learn in this type of situation. So they would rather just like stay top lane and play tanks, or I actually think top lane is a really, really powerful role right now in general, because there are a lot of different matchups that can be played and you get priority. So just like being top, and you can actually affect the game a lot because, again, bruisers themselves are so strong on like 2-item spikes, and that's where the game feels really relevant. So I feel like top lane as a role right now is actually really, really strong. So maybe they're just happy hanging out there as well. So
I think on the Huni thing, this is a little bit off topic, but I think that as a player, he's one of the few that's in the Western region, EU, NA right now, that is exceptionally good, obviously at all the roles. And I was expecting to see more out of imports, more flexibility on par with like the level of that Huni's displaying it, just because of how comfortable they can be playing different roles. I think that people's unwillingness to go into other roles is also sort of like a testament to how comfortable are they outside of their own home turf, or how much of a problem do they think that they might end up causing their own team if they go outside of that. So I don't know.
Maybe, but I would say that we're still not seeing it a ton in Korea either. Like, I think I understand where you're coming from and saying that, okay, Korean players maybe understand each other's roles a little bit better, but I just think in a team dynamic, like Faker has played how many mid lane games, Bang has played how many mid lane games? Like, Bang is not going to know as much about mid as Faker. Faker is not going to know as much about bot as Faker, just in general. And we even see Bang play Lulu, and it's like, okay, this guy really understands that champion really, really well, I'm obviously being sarcastic. You can't tell because my voice doesn't change. But
I could tell by sort of the mime you did along with it, You didn't just sit motionless.
Yeah, of course. So it's not. I don't think it's a West only thing. Like, I do think that we're in a situation where players everywhere are having to think differently about their champions in different roles and different positions, and they are slow to do it. It's just natural. They're not as used to it.
The other way you could convey that you're being sarcastic, because remember, you've got to stick with your strengths here, is when you do that ridiculous voice as though someone's talking and you're obviously mocking them and they're like, gee, Willikers, like a 1960s comment. So I'm like, oh, I think this is really good. Like, just you stick with that. That's a key note for you that you got to play anytime you can. It just, the crowd loves it for a start off. You're playing to the crowd with that one.
I can pretend I'm not made of cardboard when I do that. It's pretty entertaining for me. So there you go.
Listen, all I'm going to say is you would fucking kill it in those like little skits that they prepare for the LCS shows, where they have like Dash on the desk and they all pretend like they're doing some like hilarious shit that like someone clearly just scripted completely, and yet they don't want to believe that we live in a world where it's scripted. Like, well, I'm not making you all script it and then do it. If you don't want it to be scripted, crazy idea, just make it up as you go. I don't know.
Just go all the way. Have the fake voice with the fake lines and the fake show,
Exactly.
There you go.
Yes. See, that's the way Travis could have beaten me. That's how he could have actually taken my crown as the king of the talk shows. He should have just gotten, he already does the first part anyway, which is get as many attractive women around you at all times as possible, in a friend capacity, of course. Yeah, like, that's his choice, but okay. He does that part, but then at that point, just feed them lines. Give them sick shit to say. Like, get someone to tell them some ballers, like, info about the meta, and then when they're saying it just off the cuff, people are like, holy shit, what's going on here? This is a new world. It'll turn out it's all fake, but who gives a fuck anyway? Also might improve the writing of some of those shows, but anyway, enough about that. Right, back to the topic on the meta. I wanted to ask this, about how the jungle is working, because we only briefly touched on that. So, on the one hand, I've noticed some of the Korean teams, part of why they actually have put in, like, for example, I noticed KT was running Rush again, because some of the teams seemingly want to have, like, the early game jungler, because they think it's so powerful, but then some of the other teams seem to also be trying to make like super carry junglers as well. If you look at some of the other players that you've seen out there, Is it still as effective to be a Score, a Max, or these sorts of like team junglers that we think of who are going to read the game? Is it as effective when you can be as powerful as a jungler now?
I mean, the thing that I said earlier about gravitating back towards a traditional meta, I still think that there's a place for them. It's just the teams have to get used to weathering the storm. And then I think that junglers like that come back online very quickly.
Okay.
I think it's weird for me almost to think of them as team junglers versus individual junglers, because I think now getting your jungler coordinating with your players is way more important just because everyone's going for like second or third spawn scuttles or whatever. So just getting people to, and then dragons matter way more at certain points. Like certain types of dragons can matter way more. Rift Herald can matter way more because Rift Herald will decimate turrets if you use it correctly. So I think just like having junglers coordinate with lanes is way more important right now. Depending on what champions they are, like are we saying we can only play aggressive champion junglers?
I think I'm thinking about the people who are just the Camille, Nidalee, these sorts of champions.
Yeah. So it's more about like the types of champions they're more comfortable on. I think a lot of it is right now, since so many people are playing like things that they're not familiar with, like even junglers are learning shit like Talia and stuff of that nature. A lot of it is coming down to just like basic champion matchups, like your knowledge and your ability to understand champions, which I don't necessarily think is specific to like super carry oriented jungle people or players. But yeah, I mean, it really depends from time to time, because Maxlore thinks of himself as a carry jungler. So he would think, okay, maybe my skill is engaging, but I am going to carry, I'm going to learn these carry champs, and maybe it doesn't always work out for him, but he can at least like get some mileage on them because he understands at least the way the map works and how to coordinate with his lanes and how to communicate with his lanes. So he can look pretty good on certain carry picks, even if he's not, you don't necessarily think of him as like the Camille player, for example.
Okay. So, here's a question I have as well. Right, I will say the main region I've been watching is LCK, because it's just the one I actually enjoy watching most anyway. And one of the things I found strange is you would think with all these ridiculous comps, and especially for the first few weeks where so many teams were like either didn't have an answer for it, or even when they had a good comp that somehow it turned out to be good, they didn't really know what they were doing themselves. Obviously, that is going to fuck up a lot of the objectives and how people play the map as it is, because they're not going to know the exact response of what to do against something they've maybe never played against or seen vaguely once, or maybe seen but never played against with their comp, I get that will make it a lot more bizarre, but as a result, I thought you'd see way more games that were just won by that, like people not understanding how to play the map or what to do next. But actually, I've noticed in LCK specifically, a lot of the teams that are the best right now are just the really good 5v5 team fighting teams. It's actually not, and a bunch of them are the ones that are just using the old comps, that are just using ADCs, a mid laner, top laner, it's the normal comp. Can you speculate as to why that would be, or is it counter in the other regions? What would you say? I
think a lot of it is when you're playing with double mage bot or and a tank top and everything else, you're thinking to yourself, how do I set up the map when the turrets are gone, right? Like, do I put my mages in the mid lane? Like, who do I side lane with? Like, who do I have like push creeps to river? Like, how far can I push creeps to river? If I have like Ziggs versus Heimerdinger, who gets pushed mid, right? Who has control, like when I have these champions in the mid lane? Like setting up the map at a certain point becomes difficult if you don't understand the champion matchups, if you don't understand how the champions work, whereas like you're used to traditional, okay, we have the three in the center who are pushing and like securing the wave. Either I have a tank like pushing to side and grouping, or I have like someone pushing out in 1-4 or something like this. Like, do I have a mage in the top lane? Like it's a lot more comfortable, and people understand the matchups in the mid game a lot better on traditional comps. So I think that leads to people just like saying, fuck it, we're going to go mid and we're going to like smash into each other and see what happens, because they're just like less sure how to set up the map as it is.
Okay. What do you think, Ellis? Is there like an ideal style that's emerged?
I don't think necessarily an ideal style. I think that you're correct in that a lot of the team fighting teams are flourishing right now. Just because I think that this meta in particular has such an emphasis on team compositions. I don't think that I've ever felt as strongly about draft or pick ban before heading into a game that I've felt with this meta. In the past, you can have some bad drafts and stuff and be like, okay, well, there's still obviously ways to play around certain stuff. But with the changes to the scuttle and the way that people play out the map with the junglers or the funnel strategy and the way that people just give up certain stuff and wait for 2-item and 3-item spikes and then a lot of chaos unfolds because of all these bruisers and whatnot, the people that are really adept at the team fighting, specifically around those spikes, are having a lot of obviously good results. Because I think that unlike a meta that we've seen in like the past year and a half, this has the most emphasis on synergistic team comps. And when you end up seeing team compositions that aren't that synergistic or that get hard countered, like for instance, I think Nunu Karthus is like hard countered by Master Yi Taric, or something like that. You'll just end up having these team fight collisions where one team is just going to be infinitely more comfortable engaging and coordinating the fight than another team. And when you look at teams that historically, even in a meta that wasn't this one, relied on these types of team fighting strategies, these types of flanks and teleports and setups and stuff, they're just going to have a much easier time against teams that use different approaches, stylistically 1-3-1s or mid-rangey type team compositions that would have an extremely fast acceleration and rely on having an early lead, or early rotations around the map, because that stuff's not happening the way that it used to with ADCs and whatnot. So I think that's all that's really going on.
Okay. What do you think, though, about the prevalence of using teleport now, Kelsey? Because I saw one game. I think it was when Kingzone played BBQ Olivers, and BBQ Olivers had 4 teleports.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just certain heal feels meh to an extent, unless you're using it in specifically the right place. So ADCs are like, I might as well just, take TP, or I'm not necessarily going to get use out of exhaust if I have longer range. So they started taking TP. And then once you have bruisers, you're like, you know what? I have engaged on my champion, so I can teleport to another lane and get a kill really fast, or make a play really efficiently if I get pushed in my lanes. So teleport just became an insanely useful skill. It's always been an insanely useful spell, and if you can use it effectively, it's in some cases way better than Flash. So I think it's just there have been a lot of opportunities for this to be effective. And if you get first turret, you get so much out of that in a lot of circumstances. So having lane swaps occur instantly. If the enemy bot lane teleports back to lane, you're like, I have prio, I go top, we get free first turret, So, yeah.
Well, I think the other thing about teleport is it denies accelerant comps as well. Team compositions in the past that relied on getting early mid jungle priority, transitioning that into a bottom play or something with bottom lanes that always had priority and push, and they were able to get chip damage on the turret, pile up a big wave for 4 or 5 or something, or likewise happening up in top lane. Teleport just denies it, shuts it down entirely, because it's almost impossible to get that kind of priority that you used to be able to get into the past without both parties being able to comfortably get to level 6 and then obviously have assistance from mid and top lane and whatnot. And so I think it dissuades that level of aggression. And then what heal would normally be used for isn't as necessary, or it's not as important as accelerating to the 1 and 2 items as fast as possible, whilst being able to still aid out your team on the other side of the map.
Okay. So as I referenced earlier, when we've had these teams in LCK who are the team fighting teams who've done very well, another aspect I wanted to ask you about in terms of how it's shaked out is, what actually is it like? How is it different when you have a team fight that is 2 AP players with no AD carry, or a fucking a tank top, tank jungler, and what's it called? Mordekaiser is your AD character. How do these team fights actually work contrasted to the traditional comp?
Heavy reliance on obviously having the summoner spells available, and then forcefully making the plays while the spikes are active. Because all the bruiser items are less expensive, and also the recipe components that build into them are just more efficient. And so obviously just playing around neutral objectives and power spikes and synergence with the ultimates and what the ultimates can coordinate with each other. I think that it's very deathball-y, like from StarCraft 2. It's not a slow, calculated fight. It's extremely just deathball.
I always used to say maybe the difference between like the way people are using global comps is okay, we can instantly trade sides, whereas like China uses it to everyone goes to the same lane, we 5v5, we do this thing. It's very much kind of a head mashing where engage becomes extremely valuable, AoE becomes extremely valuable. You have to understand how you're layering this. You have to have a conversation of, does it matter who engages first? Like, how do we want this to play out if we use this? Like, if your Fiddlesticks uses his ultimate preemptively and gets no one, that just ends the game, you know, in a lot of different cases. So you have to understand like how all these are layering down, because it's not there's no straightforward, if you aren't playing with an ADC, there's no straightforward like front to back tanks going forward. ADC has protection, kiting. Like, we're seeing way less kite comps. We're seeing way less disengage comps. So it's all about just like who jumps first almost.
Okay. Right. One thing I wanted to ask about, and along the lines of all these weird different roles that are swapping up what they even do, and then the number of different champions that are available, is this is going to be a side tangent, but it's not very long. One of the things I actually enjoy about watching Overwatch in the Overwatch League is that they actually have very limited roles, and in fact some roles literally just play one hero the whole time, basically, like a Diva or something, or the fucking Winston, you know, like they're not swapping to other things even in the same game. They just play one thing, and the good thing about that, believe it or not, as a viewer, because it's a very chaotic game, is it sort of streamlines it, and so you can to some degree understand what's going on better, as in you see like, right, well, he's got to do this in response to that person, and then as a result what you're really gauging is how well, based on all the past experiences of when that scenario plays out, these particular two players played that out, or a bunch of players collectively played it out. So as much as people will automatically, I get the feeling when the meta is very wide open and you can play many different champions, think that's going to automatically be a good thing, it also naturally will lead to a lot more chaos. Like, it'll lead to a lot more times where no one really knows entirely what's going on, or someone has a sense that they have an edge here, but you know, the pathway, the neural pathway of what you can do and supposed to do isn't going to be as sort of well worn as if it's more like you play these three things into these two things and it's going to interact this way. How have you actually enjoyed having so many different champions available to the different roles? Have you thought it's actually made for good League of Legends after the first, say, week and a half where it was a bit dodgy?
I like it. I'm a huge fan of chaos. I like chaos because I know that amidst chaos you can eventually find stability, and it'll always just go back there. I've said that quite a few times now. But I think it's really, really interesting, and I also think it's actually healthy for the game.
Okay.
I prefer watching players do things they're good at personally. So I would always rather see like someone. I would always rather see Prey on Ashe or something like this. You know.
Okay.
Those types of scenarios. So I think I enjoy the game more when it's like that. But at the same time, I think that seeing compositional interactions, like one of the things that I always gravitated towards Dota for, since you've mentioned Dota a few times, is seeing like how these compositional interactions work and seeing how different ults go together, because like you have super long cooldown ults and you're stacking them, and some compositions are designed just specifically for that game, for that cheese, you know? So I really enjoy watching that, thinking about that, and doing that now in League of Legends is pretty rewarding in a lot of situations, because you have to think, okay, will this team run extra? Because one thing I've been sort of dismissive about some of like the duo mids or the mages and stuff like this, and said that they're kind of they're cheeses, or they're just not going to be the objective way to play the game. But it gives you an edge when the other team has to plan for you, because it's like, I have to keep in my mind that the next rotation could be Braum Kaisa. So if I pick my jungler now or something like this, and the jungler can't deal with Braum Kaisa, then I've lost, you know? Or will this team run an ADC? Won't this team run an ADC? If they don't swap their champions in a timely fashion, will my players be able to go to those lanes? You know, those types of questions are really rewarding and really interesting. And I don't think we've necessarily seen that in League of Legends for a really long time to this extent. So I like that aspect, but I also, a lot of it is just very Fiesta and has limited, I guess, high level play to an extent.
Oh, I think the level of play overall has been, like, overall it's lower than past seasons and stuff. But I think that's particularly due to people trying to stabilize.
Okay. Well, one thing that we basically referenced earlier was that there have been some teams, like obviously the Fnatic one's a big one, where they literally announced, like, we're not even going to play Reckless. So we're explicitly telling you we're probably not going to have AD carries in these games. And then also you've got the scenario where, I mean, we actually live in a world where SK Telecom was making Faker play supports, and then they were like, right, we're going to sub you out, Faker, now, and let this Pyrian guy who used to be the sub for fucking P1 play, and he gets mid lane champion, so suck my dick, Faker. Which, as far as I can tell, is what Kobo was basically saying. So we're living in a world that's a very fucking dark timeline in that respect. Is that just gimmick play? Like, surely Fnatic is just going to put Reckless back in like a week, and it's just not going to be a problem anymore, right, Kelsey? We're not really going to see teams completely thrown apart like that. Surely, if anything, it's going to be like, even if it's an AP bot, the AD carry is going to learn to play the AP champion, right?
Snake have been doing this with 2 supports for 2 weeks now, so they're still going for it. I think the first week they did it, you saw immediate results, right? They were winning games. Second week, it was like, yeah, this is super easy to deal with. We can draft against this. We understand what you're going to do, what you're looking to play for, and I don't think they won any games in the second week. So I do think that Fnatic believe that they're bringing, and they even said that they believe they're bringing a sense of strategic diversity by having like Wipo here, because they will play Reckless in some games. And they, like, Wipo came on broadcast and said they'll play Reckless in games against teams where they think the games will go longer. You know, they'll play him in games where they think it'll snowball and be a one-over, you know.
Which is also hilarious for how, if you're telling the truth, you're basically telegraphing the whole game also to the opponent. But okay.
So he's either lying or he's making it pseudo easy to prepare for them as soon as you have the roster known 24 hours in advance. So I actually think that they will ultimately, I mean, it gives them like kind of a cool setup, but I think that like a better roster will be the Reckless roster.
You have 24-hour notice in Europe?
Now, yes.
Oh, wow.
24-hour notice for what the roster will be, because it's best of one, so yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because LCK, I think they tell you like an hour before it goes live.
Yeah, it would obviously be way more useful if it was like a best of 3 type series or something like this. But if we're just doing best of ones with an hour, with 24-hour notice of rosters or whatever, then it's really not as useful as it could be.
I think they should just give no notice, and it should just be like, whose music is that? What the fuck? What's Period doing here? Is he alive? You know. So
theoretically, if Snake could work it back in, because they actually have 2 like pretty decent AD carries on their roster. So if Snake could work their AD carries back into their roster, like in the middle of a series, and started doing that, then that could be an interesting development for them. But they haven't tried that yet. So,
okay, right. In a world where we do revert back, and it's just the traditional comps with a few, variants and like people trying cheese or just one-offs that they think work in this one scenario. what will the ordinary comps run day in and day out look like with the new itemization? What is going to change in that respect?
So, you mean, just to clarify real quick, do you mean ordinary as in like ADC bot? Or
Yes, the traditional roles, yeah. I like the way that's become like we've now entered sort of like SJW territory with League of Legends. Like how bloody heteronormative what? So just because he's a strong champion, he has to be an AD carry. Does it? Okay, anyway, that's a side tangent there.
Why are you assuming my role, Thorin?
Exactly. I could play anything. What do you mean? What you saying? AD carries don't play Lulu? Yeah, they do. We've got fairy dust all over this motherfucker. Anyway, so what will the new world of League of Legends equipped with this interesting brand of itemization lead to?
I think that the late game ADCs aren't being looked at the way that they should be. I think like Kai'Sa, ADC, Varus, I think no one's touching Kog'Maw. I think Twitch is not being looked at, and I already know that the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, he's too weak in lane, like the fucking animals that they are that don't realize that you can get out of any lane. You can go even in CS in any lane, and the point, especially with how League is advancing, the point is team fights and later gameplay and mid-game and late game, so it doesn't matter if you fucking lose first turret and fall down 1k gold, you're still going to win the team fight.
Does it hurt you to see Deft playing Vladimir?
It does. Deft, I think, is a little bit different. He has a lot of fun with off rolls, but I think that these ADCs aren't being looked at the way that they should be, especially with the way that some of the team comps are ending up, because those are also ADCs that can go into Wit's End and provide more damage for their mid and top laners and whatnot, and so there's some utility there. And then I think that if people forget how to coordinate or play out the games and the team pulls those champions out later on into the season or something, then that in and of itself can cause some chaos for some people.
I think that yes, you can get out of any lane with even CS, but if you're playing like champions optimally, then obviously someone is going to have an advantage. Some matchups you just lose turret at 6 minutes and those matchups suck.
Yes.
So obviously you don't want to draft that. I think that part of the problem is that some of these ADCs you've mentioned, the stopgap item for them, like the first item is supposed to be Stormrazor or something like that. In a lot of these situations, it depends on the champion, obviously, but for a lot of the crit champions, it's like, okay, we'll give you Stormrazor. You'll have like a useful crit until you're building your attack speed items and your eye edge. But a lot of ADCs just don't like this item, and it's really awkward to use in certain circumstances. So with some champions, you have to completely change like the way you're approaching trades or the way you're approaching lane to even use Stormrazor effectively. So I think that that's part of why people have like an aversion to playing some of these AD carries, is because you are like approaching the role, or you're approaching certain trades and setups differently because of the way they changed itemization.
Well, I don't think Caitlyn or whatever. I mean, when I mentioned Kai'Sa, Varus, Cog, Twitch,
those are. I might disagree with you a little bit on them being like super late game AD carries, like because obviously Cog and Kai'Sa right now is double Rage Blade, so I think that they're actually AD carries that can compete fairly early. But yeah,
their potency late game is insane.
Yeah.
Twitch, with the change to Blade of the Ruin King, the gold going down, his itemization path is the Blade of the Ruin King into the Runons, into Eye Edge.
Yeah.
So he already has the crit when he completes Eye Edge. So Twitch almost comes online the same time that he used to in the past, but now he has more oomph in his kit. And then with some of the changes that obviously happened with runes and whatnot, I just don't think that he's being picked up in some matchups as like a counter. I know he's been experimented with by Koreans. I don't obviously have any knowledge on NA or EU scrims or whatnot, but I am shocked that like Cog and Varus aren't popping up as much as they are, because of their ability to just be like, okay, fuck you, I'm going to go Wit's End, first item, and if you have double AP bot, or if you have a lot of AP champions, we're going to be massively tanky. And then we're going to be an ADC that can sit back, turtle our 3, tier 2 turrets, and then we're going to run you over because we don't slow down at 4 and 5 items like your champions do.
And we are seeing, I think, increasingly more Varus and Cog, actually, and more Kai'Sa. Like, Kai'Sa is becoming increasingly priority, even outside of the gold funnel strat, like we saw in NA as well. And this past week, so I think people are definitely reverting back to some of these AD carries, and like Ezreal is suddenly, oh yeah, we could play Ezreal into Heimer maybe, like those types of situations are coming up more and more. But I think people are still afraid to touch stuff like Trist, obviously, or all this other stuff. So
yeah.
Okay, a question I had was, why is it that in like LCK, I think even in LPL, they've been playing quite a lot of Nocturne, but that is actually barely being used in the West, it seems.
Well, it's banned every game, kind of in the West, so there's that aspect.
Why is it so significant against banned then?
Because it's just really obnoxious. You would think that like traditional that you can counter it with something like Shen, but the darkness like cockblocks the Shen. You can't like teleport in on someone until it's off. There's just really difficult to deal with him. They buffed the crap out of him, and he's really strong. With lethal tempo, he's like really insane, and he just pops like basically any squishy at level 6. So he's really difficult to deal with.
Okay. He's just obnoxious, and with the way that early games can go, if you take a jungler that needs to be aggressive, because there's few meta junglers right now that can compete with just going toe-to-toe with him if you just both power farm. So then the problem is if you choose a jungler that is meant to be aggressive, but maybe the lane matchups don't work out in your favor and the color that you're on or whatnot, if you end up botching one gank or you path incorrectly once, then he just gets a lead. And then his level 6 is so oppressive because of the way that all the changes have happened over the last few patches and then the buffs that Nocturne received and whatnot. It's just quite obnoxious to play against because he accelerates so quickly and he's so oppressive when ahead, and it feels like his ultimate is always fucking up. And it just makes it kind of difficult to play around. And then when you're lacking defensive summoners in some of the lanes, exhaust or heal or whatever, it makes it that much easier for him to just abuse you.
Okay. And then another similar like region difference question I had was, I noticed in LCK, you see quite a lot of Zoe played there. But again, that is another thing that is just banned to fuck in all the Western regions. Why do Westerners just not allow it through at any point?
I think Zoe's busted. I think it's correct to not let her through. I don't fucking know how Chovy and Griffin managed to get her every goddamn game. She's one of the mid laners that I think can resist the bruiser meta. She can stabilize, and then she can do both. She can either resist siege, resist engage, but she can also turn a gear similar to old Jace, where she goes, now I'll just light you up if you're under turret, and we have the lead. I don't know why she's being let through in Korea as much as she is. Korea did this with another champion in the past, where you just questioned why it was always allowed to go through, and then it's almost like at the end of the game you're scratching your fucking head and you're like, yeah, that's weird, why didn't we ban that champion? I wish I could answer why she appears so much here. I do think that she deserves to be banned a lot more than she is right now.
I forget which game it was, but there was a Camille jungle just doing first clear. Zoe just like one-shots from full health with Q, basically.
Spirit, right? BDD,
yeah, it was Spirit.
BDD level 9 with Protobelt, I think.
Yeah. It was ridiculous. Yeah, so it wasn't first clear, but it was just like absurd. Just one shot, like from 100 health to nothing with a Q. So I do think this champion is pretty disgusting overall. I think that a lot of people undervalue this champion just because they aren't playing against super strong Zoes, but when you play against a Zoe who's and you don't even have to be that good with her because she can hit Q, like it almost has no cooldown.
It has 0.25, Kelsey.
Yeah, there you go.
You gotta, there is counter. It exists.
It exists. So I also think there's just so much stuff that's absurdly strong though right now. Like you've got Talia, Nocturne. Some people really value Camille, like Aurelia. I think they're like you've got a lot of Swain priority coming up now. You have Vladimir's and stuff like this. There's just so much stuff that's insanely strong that you sometimes something is just going to get through.
Right.
And that's why blue side becomes really powerful as well, because first pick is you're guaranteed almost to get something game breaking. So
I think that all the game breakers right now are also just so strong as standalones. I think Talia jungle is probably the best standalone jungler. Zoe, I think, is a monstrous standalone champion. There's so many strong standalones right now that they fit into so many different team compositions and let you take the draft in any which way that you want. That it makes it quite difficult. It's not like that Rengar, Camille, LeBlanc meta where you can just ban away the three, and then you're left with something.
Pure curiosity, Kelsey, what is the reason as to why Lucian is the most played champion in the LPL right now?
They really like LPL really likes laning phase, and they really like AD carries. And Lucian is just a really strong laning AD carry. I think that's the best way to put it. They have a tendency to, like, within 5 minutes, everyone's bot lane and someone's taking first turret, and they're rotating really fast after that. So Lucian works very well in that context. So.
Okay. Right, since as everyone will have noticed, the theme of this episode has been once you sort of talk people down from the hysteria of the fact you can do other things in League of Legends than the past seasons suggested, it's not really that crazy. Like, people aren't going to do this all the time. In fact, teams already have sort of given up. And in fact, some teams never really got that into it anyway and still did fine, as I mentioned, with some of the teams in Korea. So it's not really as extreme as people say. With that said, is the meta switch enough that it will actually make some teams much better than they would have been in a traditional meta? Will there be some teams who just seem like they're not going to recover from what's happened now? How would you speculate on either side?
I think naturally it should, because the meta is so chaotic and it's such a change that we've never had experienced since League of Legends has become aware of strategy and picks and stuff, right? Because season 1, season 2 is a complete dumpster fire. I think that because it's so chaotic and so many new things are going on and so many teams are having to talk with each other and players interacting with one another, explaining about different champions, playing champions that you're not used to, I think it's healthy. In that regard, I'm going to use another StarCraft analogy. It's like Protosses that had to learn the VeXii build. Okay. When mechanically they weren't capable of pulling it off. They didn't have the timings down. They didn't have the control on the High Templars or the Corsairs or the knowledge of how to utilize the DTs. And once everyone did learn it, then comes forth the next evolution of Protoss, where you incorporate that into even stronger macro play and all these other timings get figured out. I think that things that cause massive shakeups that make people adapt, even if they don't end up fully adapting, they're still going to get something from it. I think that's good for the game. I think naturally you should have to improve.
I would agree with that. I think that it also covers some weaknesses. So, for example, if you're really good at snowballing ridiculously out of control, but in the last split you sucked at like setting up for Baron or controlling like stacking waves and properly sieging across the map or anything like this, then we're in a position where that matters way less if everyone is just going 5v5 or if there's just like you're able to get your carry super far ahead on all the snowball gold and gold funneling, then to an extent some of those maps setups matter way less and it's easier for people to close out. But at the same time, teams that were good at that but sucked at the other stuff are forced to get better at that. One of the most ridiculous things I've heard, though, is I really think X team is suffering because they're not able to pick up the new AD champions, the new bot lane champions. I've heard this so many times, but if you look at top teams in any region, there's at least one in every single region that adheres strictly to playing only ADCs. Like, it's one of the most absurd lines I've heard, but I've heard so many people use it to describe to explain why X team isn't doing well. It's like, yeah, that's totally it. You've hit the nail on the head, you know? But there are certain aspects of the game that definitely teams that were doing well before are no longer succeeding at because of the patch change. But I don't think it's specifically champion pools.
Okay. What about then the Baron changes that you referred to earlier? Like, are you taking... I'm going to go ahead and guess you're not a fan of that.
I actually liked the idea of what they did before the last Baron change patch, which is where they added like some extra damage, but it was easier to kill. You know, I actually liked that idea because then you kind of had to set up a little bit more. You couldn't go in at super low health, but you still could get the reward like more immediately. So I liked that idea, but then for some reason they said, oh, we went too extreme with this, and now Baron is basically just you blow on it a little bit and it falls over. So I'm not a super big fan of it, but I don't think it's terrible or anything. Like, I don't hate it, you know.
Like you don't think it just devalues some of what you're going to do in the mid game?
To an extent, it devalues. But like, you figure it out, you work around it. You just find different ways of setting up for Baron. And maybe it's easier if teams have snowballed ridiculously, and that's fine. But like, they should be rewarded for doing that. I think that's fine. So.
Okay. Thoughts, LS?
I don't have too many. I think that all the neutrals should get shaken up more. Herald, I think that they did a pretty good job with Herald. I think that Dragons and Baron needs to be, I think they just have to entirely revisit Baron and Dragons. And I hope that they do that for Season 9.
Okay.
I don't mind it, but I also don't like it. So I'm not gonna, I won't object to eating it, but I'm not gonna go out of my way to get that for dinner. You know what I mean?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go on.
I was just gonna, the way Baron works right now, it means it's part of, I think it's the biggest factor that makes the 2-item spike like so important. It's the biggest factor controlling that aspect of the game and why it's become like front and center stage. So.
Okay. LS, does it trigger you that obviously you were known as a great admirer of Crown in his rise in Season 6, and in Season 8, Summer, he doesn't even start, but wait, it gets worse. He doesn't start because instead they have your boy Fly, the amazing Fly, who couldn't even cut it on Fly Quest, the team literally named for him, and he now can live, LS, though, because he's like, haha, joke's on you. I was never a mid laner. Time to pop off to all the other lanes with this utility shit. Does that trigger you? Watching him pilot those support champions?
Oh, Jesus. No. Oh, God. Fly never struck... I mean, he doesn't take on the same role as Crown. And on the topic of Crown, I think even going into Worlds last year, it was a fall from grace. He doesn't look like the same person that he was when I was hyping him up. He's touchable in solo queue. In solo queue, he's doing really poor. He's like low masters right now, I think. And he's just playing a bunch of random champions. And then I almost feel bad talking about him because there's like the controversy where he went into like Jaedong's stream and he talked about some serious depression stuff, and he said things that I think are really worrying because in Korea, depression is taboo. You can't really tell people that you're depressed. They think that it's like a disease. Psychologists and therapy are not really common here and stuff. I don't know what the fuck he's going through. But in that regard, I think that with the way that the meta is right now and the way that Samsung can operate, Fly almost just seems like actually a better fit. I always thought of Fly as like an innovator, someone that would find openings or cracks in, you know, someone's positioning in something. I think most notably his Talon like comes to mind or something. Innovative picks, utility, good eye for stuff. I think this is a good meta for him. And I think that it makes sense for him to be starting. But as for Crown, I just feel really bad for like a lot of reasons, but he's not a good player right now.
Sure.
Pretty much it.
No thoughts on that, Kelsey?
I mean, when Fly went to NA, I always said I think this is a terrible move because I think the way the Fly plays is super communication reliant. Like, he's the kind of guy who likes to work with his jungler a lot, likes to go to side lanes, likes to play things like Aurelion Soul that are really reliant on, again, working with teams, setting up like roam timings and all this other stuff. So I thought it was a terrible move for him to go to NA, and I'm glad he's back in Korea and seems to be doing well. Crown,
obviously, by the way, what Gen G should do, just to do like a baller sort of inter-org bit of BM, is they should show some footage of Fly when he was on FlyQuest and he was just getting his head banged in and he looked like worse than fucking Keen, which says it all. And then they should just go, Fly, you don't really look yourself. Are you hungry? Have this Snickers. And then when he eats the Snickers, he's like winning all the games on Gen G. And then they're like, haha, maybe they should sponsor us. Fuck FlyQuest. Anyway, I put that. The last part was just editorial from me, but yeah.
Yeah, that was good. I felt like Crown is someone whose champion pool is a bit slow to adapt, just in general, even when he was like at his peak, and he was in a position where Victor was really, really good, and he like had played so many games on Victor, and he has a specific style where I actually think one thing that he's really good at is just transitioning to playing top, pushing to river, helping team with vision, and then pushing to river, helping team with vision on top side, play things like Blishbane, Victor, stuff like this. So when he can't necessarily do that, then he didn't impress me as much, and so that's like that's it. It could probably has a lot to do with his depression. Probably has a lot to do with just like him maxing out a little bit right now. So there you go.
This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Mikkel Hansen, Bash, Daniel Yordanov, Yordan Tsenkov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, and a special thanks to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to get teasers for my upcoming work? Find out who's coming next, what topics are being discussed? Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest to appear on one of my shows or in one of my videos? Would you like to ask a question in my monthly Patreon AMA, or perhaps even discuss esports as part of a discussion show I run on a monthly basis? Donators can also discuss the topics expounded upon in my videos with me and the other patrons on our Patreon page. All of this and more at the Patreon link below.